Welcome to Our Future is Kind, a podcast exploring how we build the future we want to live in, one kind act at a time. I'm your host, Michael G. Neese, president of Our Future is Kind, and your trusted companion as we search out kindness strategies we can use in our everyday lives. Together, as we chase the idea of building a kinder future, we will interview experts in kindness, team building, human motivation, corporate culture building, relationships, plus politicians, artists, and those with a vision for a healthy and kind future, one we all want to live in and deserve to enjoy together. In addition to interviews, we will consider positive depictions of humanity's future in art, literature, movies, and media. And we will issue kindness challenges each week, give an update about Our Future is Kind, the company, and what it's doing to stay true to its mission. So, let's dive in. Hello, everybody. I am so excited to have you here for episode 000. This is the very first episode of Our Future is Kind, and it's an upside-down format. I've invited somebody else whom I trust explicitly to be our guest host, and her name is Natalie Siston. I have to say, there are not too many people whose books I keep immediately handy at my desk. But ever since I read Natalie's book, after meeting her at a National Speakers Association meeting, she gave me a copy of her book. I loved it. I read it. I was so excited because we're obviously kindred spirits. If you don't have a copy of this book, you really should get it because it's a lot of anecdotes from her childhood, and she can talk more about that if she wants to, about how to know who you really genuinely are. So let her out. Wonderful read. So with that, Natalie, I'm just going to hand the whole show over to you.
Oh my gosh, such power and responsibility. Is that Superman? Am I Superwoman today? Or is that what superhero? I'm not up on my superheroes. We're going to be our own superheroes today, Michael. Well, I am, first of all, I love to go back to the moment we met because I don't believe in coincidences, and I think our meeting was no coincidence. Michael and I were sitting next to one another in a session, like he said, at the National Speakers Association conference. And it was one of those moments where you're sitting in really long tables. It's been a long day. You could just put your head down and take notes, but there was something magnetic about just us sitting next to each other. So we started the dialogue and quickly did the book exchange and met up for breakfast the next day and have continued the dialogue. And I was so incredibly happy to have you call me for this because I think that, we all want to channel our inner Oprah someday. So that's what I hope I can provide for your audience today. So, well, Michael, first of all, there are going to be many people who are meeting you for the very first time in this moment. So why don't you tell them who are you and why are you starting this podcast?
Sure. Gosh, thank you for the eloquent introduction here. My name is Michael Neese, and I have decided to start this podcast because I feel like the future keeps falling into our laps moment on moment on moment. And so many of us just go into this autopilot mode. We aren't really thinking about it. And so we end up building a future that's just kind of free thought. It's just stream of consciousness. And I think that there is a better way to do it. If you want to have a future that you want to live in, then you can mindfully think about each moment as it hits your life. And what are you going to do? How are you going to contribute to that vision of what the future should be? So the whole idea of this podcast is also the search of my life. It is, how do we build the future we want to live in? And how do we do it in kind ways? Because you can't hit a target if there is no target. So that's what this whole show is about, is to find the experts, find people who can talk to us about kindness, unkindness, what could the future look like, and learn together as we go.
So I am fascinated with your background, Michael, because I wouldn't have known any of this meeting you at that Speakers Association conference. I figured you might have had the typical background that many of us do. I'm a coach by training, corporate former corporate person, and you have been a science teacher. You have been a planetarium manager. I mean, seriously, there has to be a very small list of people in the world who have had that title. And you're a programmer. You've done SAS programs, statistical programming. Talk to us about how, and I'm just going to call it out here. You strike me as with those science nerd. Is that okay? You take that
Yes,
kindly.
I
Did
own
you
that. I wear the badge proudly.
Okay, I hope you received that kindly. So talk to us about how you are going from that background and how does that tie into this body of work that you're called to do around kindness?
Yeah, the background that I have is one that probably reflects just deep curiosity and an interest in where we're all going. I mean, the SAS programming that I was doing was in service of pharmaceutical product development. So finding the new drugs that are going to provide relief for a patient. To me, that's just such honorable work, because at the end of the process, you have somebody standing in the kitchen with a glass of water and a tablet, and technically you've delivered medicine, but really you've delivered hope. And to me, that's so exciting, right? When I was a planetarium guy, and I'd bring people in, put them in the reclined seats, and they just look up at the sky, and then I'd bring the lights down, and then I would shine all of the simulated night sky, including just this wealth of stars up on the dome. And it's the thought of like this ties us to the past, this ties us to the future, this ties us to each other. So yeah, I guess the way that you can look at it is I've always been curious, how do we fit in? Where do we fit in? How do we, spend our time here on planet Earth in effective and helpful ways, and ways that are beautiful, inspirational. So that's what I feel like I draw in from that part of my background.
One of my favorite things to do it was one of my favorite things to do when I was interviewing back in my corporate days. It was what I call looking beyond the jobs that people have held and looking at their interests. And so what's really struck me about your background is, and this is all coming from LinkedIn, so I hope everyone goes out on LinkedIn, connects with you, they can see this for themselves. But you held a role, but you also did so much more in service of community to the organizations you were part of. Talk to us a little bit about how kind of those, what I would call extracurricular roles or positions, how has that brought you to where you are today? And to people who are perhaps sitting in those sometimes very thankless places, what can you tell them about the road they're on?
Yeah, I think we don't have to be bound by our titles, by how we're labeled either by our companies or by ourselves. I think you have a lot more power inside of you than you will ever guess. Kindness is probably the best superpower any of us has, and we all have it. Anytime that you have the opportunity to lift somebody else up, you can just whip out your huge kindness superpower and you can lift them. It doesn't take much. It takes asking people genuinely, "How are you doing? What can I do for you? What do you need? What excites you?" And pursuing those things. So when I was in pharma for years, I was always part of the social committee. I was always creating these like remote employee communities because I was remote and I realized I didn't have to feel alone, and neither did anybody else. So that's what I did was I reached out and formed these big communities. It's just a lot better if you're going through life and not feeling alone and feeling like other people care about you and you care about those other people. And so you asked what should people be thinking about if they're hearing this and they're in a corporate space or they're in some job and they don't necessarily feel that connection or they don't necessarily feel lifted up all the time. I would say that you have the choice, and it only takes one really bright light bulb in a room to cast lots of light out onto everyone else. So if you're in a space where you can bring those smiles, bring that compassion for other people, Before you know it, other people are going to start doing what you've been doing, and you'll have this sort of following or this sort of clique of, hey, we're the kindness crew. We can change everything around us. And before you know it, you've driven out a lot of darkness.
Mm. I think by what you just said, it really resonates with me why we connected kind of beyond just the conversation we had. So I grew up in a town of 600 people, Republic, Ohio, trying to put it on the map for what it's worth. But in that town, I mean, you really had to rely on community and you had to have a network. It was easy to call on the neighbor for that cup of sugar or the ride to wherever you needed to go. And I think as I've moved throughout my life to bigger cities and bigger companies and bigger, neighborhoods or whatnot, it seems like it can feel a little challenging to step into that space of community and connection. And for a long time in my mid 30s, just felt incredibly lonely. And I ended up blogging about this, and it led to a whole year of experience, which you don't even know this about me. It's not in my book, but what you just said, I think, is going to strike a chord with a lot of your listeners in terms of the correlation between kindness and combating loneliness, which we know is on the rise as one of the biggest health issues of our time, the lack of connection and the loneliness. So, talk about how you might address this on your show.
So, our Future is Kind podcast is this opportunity for me to reach out to people who I either know, and I know that what they bring to any situation is connection. They bring this gravitas in terms of I can help others, and I know why I'm on this earth, and it is to connect with other people genuinely and to let them know how much they're cared for and cared about. So when I find those people that I already know and get them on the show, they can talk to us about when they've seen kindness done the right way, when they've seen people trip a little, and then how they recover, but how that authenticity and how that vulnerability that actually builds your brand as a kindness ambassador, if you will. And then people who have seen great unkindness, and how did they deal with that? How are they brave in those moments? Because it would be a naive of us to think that there's never a punch or a kick coming at us. It's gonna happen, right? Well, how do you bravely face that and still have the resilience to say, yeah, I get it. You're throwing this, this blow at me, but really, I think you're maybe just having a bad day. Are you okay? How can I help you? So that's my thought, at least, is that, as I invite different people to the show, hopefully over time, it's also just a lot of people that I don't know who are much more in the public eye, who have undergone, public scrutiny and unkindness at the hands of the general public, or people who've been able to spread the message even more effectively. So yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where the show is going to go, but I think as we define it together, people who are listeners to the program can send in, like, you need to have this person on, or I just heard this great thing about a program that's going on in Ohio, and you need to highlight this in some way. So that's another part of the show, is that we'll also be doing little featurettes on various depictions of how the future could be and how kindness could be more pervasive than it is right now.
Excellent. There will be an element of crowdsourcing, is what I'm hearing. So send Michael your ideas, everyone. Send them your kindness experts. Send in your stories. Send all of the ideas to help this be what you need it to be as a listener. Because as we all know, that's what's going to keep having people come back, week after week to listen into your show. One of the reasons that we connected so well is we've both gone on this author journey, which is unique. I think, many people say they want to write a book. Some people actually write the book, and fewer of those actually publish a book. I would love for you to tell us now, like, what's one of the top things you learned from that experience of writing in kind, and how's the book going to tie into what you do in the podcast?
Yeah, the book was just this labor of love. As a big gift for my 50th birthday, my wife said, "Here is a writing retreat. Go to that, enjoy." Because I had probably left a lot of brochures around the house about how I wanted to go to a writing retreat, but um, I love writing. I've always loved writing. I wrote a planetarium show 25 years ago, and I wrote a children's book about 4 or 5 years ago. And so the new book, In Kind, is all about my own journey through different parts of my life where I've gotten kindness completely wrong, and I expose how sad that is and how much straying from the path of integrity just really hurts, and then how to get back onto the path of integrity, because you make mistakes all the time. Everybody makes mistakes, but getting back on the path of integrity and saying, I didn't treat you the kindest way that I could have, and I'm so sorry about that. I'd love to turn a fresh page and see how we can interact better. And I own my part of that bad interaction that we had the last time. So the book is filled with all of these little anecdotes from my life, but then also strategies and surveys and journaling practices and things like that that the reader can latch onto, that I'm going to be bringing into the show, so that we know a little bit more about what's the human psyche, what are we bringing to every interaction that we have, and how can we be our best selves. I think that you mentioned a little bit ago that you had this period where you felt alone and where it didn't feel good and you weren't sure exactly how to move forward. And I think that self-care and directing some of the kindness back inward is absolutely a critical part of this show. And there's an entire chapter that talks about how I didn't do that one time, and I really paid for it. So yeah, the book is integral to what we're doing here. And then you asked the broader question of like, what is it like, writing and going on that journey. I don't have to tell you, but for anybody who's listening in, who's thinking about writing a book, write the book, or sit down and write blog posts, and then eventually weave those together. I mean, I know, Natalie, that's part of your experience, is that you've been a writer in smaller pieces until you got that full book all together. And it's just so gratifying when you like, oh, well, this fits with this. I've been saying sort of the same thing all along, and I can fit them together now. And it's a great moment when you get there.
Agreed. One of the questions I got most frequently when my book was published in 2020 was, how long did it take you to write the book? And for me, I always tell them there's two answers to that question. One is 32 years, because I started writing my diaries when I was 8 years old. I published when I was 40. And so I said, and a lot of those stories from when I was 8 showed up in that book, like verbatim from the diary in the italicized. So 32 years, or 8 months, because I in earnest started writing at the beginning of 2020 and came out in November of 2020. So I think it's interesting where we find those pieces in our life. And I feel like what to me I'm hearing from you, the thread I'm pulling through, is you want to create a space that's intentional, that's purposeful, that's mindful, that ultimately helps your listener and your guest, whomever you're thinking about, really share their why, share why they do what they do, and how kindness has been a part of that, so that they can really see themselves more fully. And I think that's when we can be seen. I think that's all our human drive and desire. And it ultimately is probably what leads us to be kind or unkind, is, does this person see me? And when I say this, it could be this person, or sometimes it's the proverbial other. And we're clearly living in a world where many of us are sensing proverbial otherness and, separation. So let's just, let's hit that kind of elephant in the room. We're clearly living in a very divisive time. Divisive, is that our word?
Sure, yeah.
We're not editing this out. We're just going for it. But divisive time. And, kindness obviously can be the cure or the antidote, or whatever word you want to use for that. So what do you hope that this podcast does simply for the time we're living in and making that different, to your point at the very beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, since I worked in the planetarium field and studied astronomy for so long, I really tend to think in like these universal terms and these cosmic terms. We are living here for this little blink of an eye. I mean, we're so profoundly lucky to be here at all. And then we're here for such a short time. I don't think that amassing a huge pile of money is going to be remembered. I don't care whose name you mention. In 100,000 years, that name will be gone. Their pile of money will be dust. Statues to themselves, almost anything is just gone over time. But I think the threads of what we hand off to the next generation and the next generation, in terms of the feelings that we cultivate, in terms of the kind of acts that we cultivate, the way that we set up the next generation to be very successful, to feel cared about, and like you said, to feel seen. That's what it's all about. That's everything. That's the whole ball game. Because, you know, in 100,000 years or even in 1,000 years, will anybody remember the names Natalie Siston or Michael Neese? I mean, boy, it sure would be fun if they did, but I'm not going to bank on that. I think what's much more likely is that people will have read your book. They will have read my book. They will have decided to dive into building that kinder future in various ways. And those are the things that get carried on in story, in song, in dance, in art, and in our hearts. We all remember being, you know, if we were lucky enough, we all remember being held in our mother's arms or our father's arms or our grandparents' arms. And just those moments of compassion. And so that's really what I would love to see in the future, is that's what we're cultivating, that's what we're building, that's what we're focusing on. So you say we're in these divisive times, and we certainly are. I know how I voted in this election, and I know that it's not the same way as some people who are very dear to me. I don't love them less. I'm not angry at them. I think that they felt seen by the person they voted for, or by that community that's cultivated around it. And so I can get that. I understand it. If they felt mocked and ridiculed by the other community, then it makes sense that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with me and my community and the way I voted, right? But we're all still humans. And in 1,000 years, nobody's going to remember words like Republican and Democrat and Libertarian. Like, they're not going to remember that. That's not what's going to matter. What's going to matter is that we're hopping onto starships together, and that we're valuing the people who are filled with adventure and who work really hard and who listen very carefully to everybody else who's around them. Those are the things that are going to matter, and that are going to be amazing future adventures of humanity.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the wild question here. So your podcast becomes wildly successful, it gets syndicated, it's going 5 years strong. You're picked up by one of the big podcasting networks. What's different in our world because of our Future is Kind podcast?
Hope. That's the one thing that if we can infuse into the world, is a sense of wonder and inspiration and hope, that we don't have to end up like one of these dystopian movies where there's been a nuclear holocaust and zombies are everywhere and people are fearful and gun-toting and angry and scared. And instead, what we're all building is, 5 years from now, let's say that people recognize, if a person gets hired at a company, then that person needs to be heard. They need to be seen. They need to have their skills and their experiences build whatever it is that company is building. If I'm in a family and there is a person who feels left out, that's tragic. And so maybe there's more of a tendency for people to listen to these people who seem so different and scary, but in the end, they're not. They want to have a really cool meal. They like to listen to great music. They want to spend time with their friends. I mean, I don't care what little clique you want to talk about. Those are pretty common. We all like flavors and colors and music. And so how do we hear each other well enough to say, gosh, I hope you have these things that you want. And how can I help you with it? So 5 years from now, when this is a raging, massive success, and I have you back on the show to celebrate how you kicked it off with me, Natalie, that's what I want to be toasting together, is everybody having a greater sense of hope and sense that, a little bit of kindness goes a very long way.
Mm. Well, I personally can't wait to see this unfold. I can't wait to see the guests that you attract. I can't wait to hear the conversations that we're able to be privy to. I mean, how great is that, right? You make it feel so intimate, but thousands of people will be able to listen in to make our world more hopeful, make our world more purposeful, make our world more kind.
Well, I think our future really is kind. And I think that's what we're all trying to get to. So Natalie, before we adjourn, I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to know a little bit more about you. Just tell us how we can reach out to you, because I know you're on LinkedIn some, but are there ways that people can get into your world as well? Because I know you are serving people's ability to feel more seen and more heard by just knowing who you are. So tell them.
Thank you so much. You've already hit on my biggest body of work. My book is called Let Her Out to Reclaim Who You've Always Been. Don't let the her fool you in the title. I looked back, I think my past 5 Amazon reviews were all men saying they got stuff out of the book as much as if, I identify as her, so that's what's in the title. But it's truly, truly the story of how we reclaim our innermost self, because ultimately that's who wants to be seen. And I think that's why we see each other, Michael, so clearly. You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram, Natalie Siston, letherout.com. Those are the best places to find me. I'm happy to be in community. My goal is to help make our world feel like a much smaller place. And I think that Our Future is Kind fits right into that goal I have. So this couldn't be a more synergistic 000 episode to your podcast, Michael. I wish you nothing but success, and I can't wait to come back, hopefully before 5 years. Yes. We want to cheer the small wins along with the big wins. So I'm going to hold you to that, coming back every so many episodes to do a check-in and debrief on your previous guests, give people almost a little catch-up episode, perhaps.
Sounds wonderful, and I can't wait. And for all of you listeners out there, everything that Natalie just told you will be in the show notes, so you can get in touch with her as well. But thank you so much for taking on the role of being guest host for this very first episode, this 0th episode, if you will.
You're quite welcome.
You've been listening to Our Future is Kind podcast, a podcast in search of a kinder future. Now, go out there and do something kind.